Hey folks, welcome back. In this video I'm going to be showing you the process in which I make my camp axes. Now you may notice I'm in a new shop, and that is true. I've been building this shop for the past couple months and I'm working on this axe pre-order. I've been making axes pretty seriously for about a year now, and I'd love to share some of the process with you. So the camp axe is about a 2-pound axe. Comes in a bearded or standard style, and this is kind of what I start with. Before this, it starts as a big round piece of 4140 tool steel, and I forge it rectangular. And the different models of axes, you start with different amounts of stock. Anyway, so I start with about 2.5 pounds to end up about 2 pounds. I forge it rectangular, then I make some little layout marks here, and what I'm going to do now is punch the eye on the power hammer. I'm going to start that with a slot punch, and I'm going to follow up with 2 drifts. So let's get everything rolling and get this axe. Okay, so our billet of steel is now in the forge, and I'm getting ready to punch it out. So that's a little hot punch that I'm using, and this is one process that takes a really long time. It doesn't show it, but this whole process takes 4 or 5 heats. It's sometimes really challenging to get a really straight hole. So it's something that I'm definitely wanting to improve on in the future. You can see the punch flaming up there, and I have some beeswax and graphite as a punch lubricant. You can see that sometimes the punch gets stuck in there, and it's quite the process to remove it. But once it gets out, which can be a little sketchy sometimes, it's no problem. And you can see now I'm just removing the little slug of material that the punch removes, and we luckily had a nice straight hole with this one. So now I'm using these short drifts under the power hammer to enlarge that hole and give it a more teardrop shape. And this is really nice to do under the power hammer. It saves a little bit of hand work. So there we go. We're going in from both sides to enlarge that hole, and then eventually I'm going to be using the next size up drift just from one side, and that allows the hand drift to go in from that side so we can do all the later processes. And I apologize for how shaky the camera is. I am currently experimenting with ways to make that a little less shaky. So you can see a couple axes there. I usually make these in 10 to 20 batch production runs. So there's definitely quite a bit of work that goes into making them all. So now, since this particular one is of my bearded design, I'm putting in that little section to segregate the beard from the rest of the axe, using a little top fuller. You saw it jump off there. Sometimes that's jumps around a little bit and is thrown all over the place. And now, for even more shaky camera footage, I'm forging out the lugs. So I have my drift coming in from the bottom, and I'm using some large drawing dies under the hammer to really spread out those lugs, which gives you a lot of really great purchase on the handle. I also think they look really nice. So now with those same dies, I'm starting to forge out the blade, and I'm going back and forth between widening it and lengthening it to make sure I get the appropriate dimensions that I want on here. And this power hammer is awesome. It's an Anyang 88 hammer, and has really been quite awesome for axe forging. Been really enjoying using it so far. So just kind of cleaning up that blade, stretching it out how I want it. And this is probably one of the most satisfying parts about making the axe, because it just turns from a block of steel with a hole in it to an actual blade, which is pretty awesome. So I've switched dies again to some very specific axe profile dies that I made. And these have a particular cross section on them to get a really nice transition from a flat blade smoothing up into those lugs. You can see it right there, and definitely fun to make those dies and kind of develop the whole process. Now this is something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but it's something I've been developing. This is just a normal shear that I have set up for hot work. Now it's not the best method, but it definitely works and saves on some time grinding. Sometimes it takes a couple attempts, but you can see out the blade there, getting that sheared off went pretty fast. So now it's just a little bit of hand work to refine the shape a little bit more, to make it to where there's less time grinding, smooth out any bigger hammer marks, and using the old 4-pound thumper there to smooth it all out with. So what I'm going and doing now is doing the final drifting of the eye. So I get them about a third to half the way there for all the forging, and then I do the rest after the blade is all forged, so I get a nice clean eye that doesn't have any cold shuts in the front or back, because that's something I really try to avoid. I like a nice clean eye on an axe, but this definitely makes me quite tired if I have to do 16 of these things, and definitely would love to find a way to kind of cut down on all the abuse on my body with this part of the process, but it's looking pretty good. So now off camera, I ground the blade, profiled it, and now I'm hardening it in some quench oil, and I'm doing that outside because the smoke is kind of gnarly to breathe. And then I tempered it so that it should be a nice axe for edge holding and toughness and all that. And I started work on the handle. Now all my handles are either ash or hickory, and I go to the wood store and I specifically select pieces that have the perfect grain to really make these things as strong as possible. And you can see now I'm using a draw knife to fit up the wood to the eye of the axe, and I've got that on there. It usually takes a couple attempts to get it seated down where I want it, get it nice and straight, and this is part of the process. You can make little tweaks if it's a little bit wonky or not quite straight. So in this production run I made a couple of those camp axes, you saw them there, and now they're all ready to start shaping the handle. So I start with just cleaning up the profile a little bit on the grinder, and then I can start moving on to rounding it over, making it comfortable. Now I can only template these things out so much, so when it comes to this point in the process, every single one of these things is made individually to fit the hand as perfectly as they can. Sometimes it takes a long time to get them just right, but start off with a 36 grit belt. Now I'm on the 220, and that kind of just smooths out all the facets from that 36 grit belt. It also kind of just makes it a little bit more refined in the shape, and I can really kind of tweak things at this point and make things nice, comfortable, and smooth. So once the handles are pretty much ready to put into the head, I then clean up the axe head, and I like having just the forge scale on kind of the flats of the blade almost, and I like a nice ground profile. I think it looks really clean, and I just really like the look of it. So I'm just kind of cleaning off all the gunk and scale from heat treat, making it look really quite nice. I also round over all the edges. It makes it to where the axe head, you can really see the shape. It looks really beautiful, and I don't want any sharp corners on there. If you're kind of choked up on the axe, we don't want that hurting your hand, or it's just nice to have them all rounded over. So now I've switched to the 10-inch contact wheel, and I've started the actual sharpening of the axe. Now sometimes I put it on the handle so I can check for straightness, but in the end it's all done by eye, and I get them pretty damn close. So just kind of refining that edge down to make it thinner, and then I'll be jumping to the top of the contact wheel in that little area where the belt's not supported, and I get a nice convex edge on there. And I usually take these things up to 220 grit. So now I'm getting ready to put the head on the handle, also known as hanging the head. And I got it on some wooden blocks there so I don't damage it. And I'm just getting it nice and seated down to where it was prior to grinding the head. And this is the last point you have to make any adjustments, because once all the wedges are in there, that thing's not going anywhere. So I make sure it's all nice and straight. I get a little bit of wood glue in the top of the kerf, and it's now ready for wedging. And typically what I do is I do a cross wedge, and that spreads the eye out in all directions. So I use 3 wedges, and that's been working super well for me, and haven't had any heads, at least that I'm aware of, come loose. And it's a really good way to hang an axe head. Really excited about it. So getting the wedges in there, I'll be pounding them down pretty soon, and that axe head is not going to come off of there until the handle breaks. So that's the goal with these things. And then sometimes I'll follow up with a steel wedge at the very end. Sometimes I determine if it doesn't need it or it does. It just kind of depends. But anyway, I get those wedges in as far as I can go, just to make sure that head is not going to come off that handle. You can see I'm also hitting it from the back, and that's to keep the wedges from cracking, because that's never fun. And then I also, if they need to go in a little bit more, I turn it around, and I'm just pretty careful with it. So for all my axes, I offer them in a pre-order format,
and that allows the customer to choose the options they want, and then I make them to order. So there's different head styles. This one's a bearded one. I also offered a standard one, which is a little bit more of a traditional shape, and then I offer a natural and blackened handle. So you can see here this one was ordered with a blackened handle, so I'm going in there lightly with an oxypropane torch and just getting that handle nice and dark. And it's just an absolutely gorgeous finish to have on these things. Feels really good in the hand. You got to be a little bit careful with it so you don't crack the handle, but if the handle is thoroughly saturated in oil, I've been getting pretty good results with that, and it just looks awesome. So really happy with that level of finish. Anyway, once that's done, it's just making a little leather sheath for it, and this axe is pretty much done. So this last pre-order went really well. Currently working on the next pre-order in the Mark II design. This is the Mark I. And there it is all finished out, and thank you all so much for watching, and I appreciate all the support.